We need to ensure maximum profitability this quarter. That means cutting costs across all departments, effective.
The city was asleep when the truth woke up. Inside the glass tower of Meridian Holdings, the janitor stood alone beneath the sterile white lights, holding a folder that could tear the empire apart. His uniform was the same dull grey he'd worn for years, but tonight his eyes carried the stillness of someone who'd seen too much and finally decided to stop pretending he hadn't. The screens flickered around him, filled with numbers, transactions, names, and ghosts of arrogance disguised as success. Before we continue, tell me where you're listening to this story from. From which city and country are you watching? Write it down in the comments. It's always moving to see how far our stories reach. And if you love stories that touch the soul, make sure to subscribe to the Triumph Stories channel. This is your place. I used to clean this floor while they laughed above me. I remember their shoes, polished enough to reflect the ceiling lights, expensive enough to step over someone's dignity without noticing. They thought I was invisible, another shadow in their empire. But every night I watched. Every night I remembered the numbers I once mastered before life decided that humility would be my new language. The clock struck midnight. Somewhere above, in the executive suite, the board was celebrating another quarter of record profits. They didn't know that the man polishing the marble floor had just found the missing line, the one that connected their deceit. I looked at the folder again, the evidence collected over years of silence. Corruption doesn't happen overnight. It grows slowly, fed by pride, watered by fear. Tonight that growth had reached its final line of balance, and I was the one holding the pen that would sign their ending. By day, the building gleamed like a monument to ambition. By night, it became a cathedral of secrets. The elevators whispered of promotions that came from loyalty, not merit. The glass walls hid whispers of deals that bent rules in the name of progress. When I first started here, I didn't speak much. The other janitors told me to keep my head down. Don't ask questions, don't look at the ledgers, just clean and leave. But I couldn't help it. Numbers still spoke to me. They always had. Before the fall, before the silence, I was one of them, a senior accountant fluent in the language of balance sheets and hidden losses. But one mistake, one scapegoat incident, and the company chewed me out like a flaw in its perfect equation. The power abuse began the moment they realized I wouldn't fight back. It was easier to destroy the quiet man. The CEO, Mr. Langford, had looked at me the day I was demoted and said, "Someone has to take the fall, Thomas. You'll land somewhere." I'm somewhere. I landed here in the same building, sweeping the same hallways, beneath the same people, invisible, replaceable. Yet the irony was beautiful. I cleaned their dirt by day and uncovered their filth by night. The memory returns with a sting. The boardroom was full, the air sharp with perfume and power. Mr. Langford's voice sliced through it like ice. "Thomas Green, you're dismissed effective immediately." Cameras clicked. Whispers rose like smoke. I tried to explain the discrepancy, but they had already chosen their scapegoat. They laughed as I gathered my papers, humiliated me for being too honest to play their games. "You don't belong here anymore," one of them whispered, his tie gleaming like armor. I walked out with my dignity folded in my pocket and my heart hollowed by shame. But as I passed through the glass doors, I saw a reflection, not of the janitor I would become, but of a man whose silence would one day echo louder than their applause. Outside, the rain began to fall. The streets reflected the lights of the tower like a city bleeding gold. Somewhere behind me, laughter continued, brittle, hollow. They didn't know that someone was watching. Long before the uniform and the mop, there was a small apartment with walls covered in framed degrees. The sound of piano music drifted through those rooms, my daughter playing after school, my wife humming in the kitchen. I used to come home late, proud but tired. unaware that pride was the most fragile form of wealth. After the scandal, that music stopped. They called it financial misconduct. I called it betrayal. Overnight, friends vanished, phone calls stopped, and the man who once spoke in figures now spoke in silence. The loneliness that followed was heavier than any bucket I would ever carry. I kept one photograph, my daughter holding a red balloon at her school recital, the only thing that survived the repossession. Sometimes, during my shifts, I'd look at that picture and whisper, "One day you'll know who your father really was." The sound of the floor buffer filled the halls, steady and rhythmic, like the ticking of time waiting for its own audit. There's a moment in every story when the silence turns into a decision. For me, it happened on a Thursday, 2 years after the humiliation. The building was quiet. The others had gone home. A power outage had forced everyone to leave early, everyone except me and the ghosts of my own endurance. I found a forgotten laptop in one of the executive offices, left open, files unlocked. Old instincts woke up. My hands trembled as I scanned the ledgers. It didn't take long to see the pattern: identical invoices, offshore transfers, hidden bonuses, loss disguised as success. The same scheme that once cost me everything. But this time, the balance would correct itself. Slowly, carefully, I began to collect, to copy, to trace. Every secret had a number, every lie had a timestamp. And for the first time in years, I felt something return. Not anger, not vengeance, but clarity. I closed the laptop, looked out at the city below, and realized something profound. Hope fading is just another form of light learning how to stay alive in the dark. The folder on the security desk felt heavier than paper. It was the weight of every time I swallowed a word, and felt it harden into a stone behind my ribs. I stood beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and understood there were only 2 ways to end a story like mine. I could burn the tower down and watch the flames draw a crowd, or I could step aside and let it collapse under the gravity of its own deceit. The second way is slower, quieter. It changes everything that happens after. I chose to disappear. I chose to become the patient custodian of truth, not its pyromaniac. I tucked the pages into an unremarkable envelope, slid it into the hollow of my janitor's cart behind a strip of duct tape no one ever peeled back, and listened. Above me, faint as a rumor, laughter lifted from the executive floor. There were toasts in crystal and thin promises spoken like they were facts. Rain pressed a delicate pattern against the windows, the kind that erases fingerprints but never conscience. In the service elevator's mirror, I watched a face I barely recognized watch me back, the face of a man learning to carry his name without flinching. On the street, midnight exhaled. Buses sighed at corners. Steam braided itself through manholes. A distant siren unspooled and vanished. I didn't hurry. People who run at this hour look guilty, and my guilt wasn't about the truth. It was about the years I let my silence do the talking. I reached the apartment I could afford and lifted the loose board near the window. The wood creaked like an old man who remembers a secret and chooses to keep it one more night. I placed the envelope in the dark. I sat beside it and prayed without asking for anything, not revenge, not victory, not even understanding. I asked for a spine made of quiet steel and a heart that would not warp when heat returned. At dawn, I called Meridian and said I needed time off. They barely registered the absence. One shadow less in a hallway didn't alter the shine. I took a second night shift at a hospital across town, where the corridors smelled like disinfectant and vows. There, I rediscovered hours that don't belong to ambition. The hours when a nurse's soft voice becomes the rope that keeps a stranger from falling. I cut my hair, shaved the old defeat from my jaw, learned the routes of delivery trucks and where the city keeps its earliest light. There is a silence that cowers and there is a silence that prepares. Mine began to hum. It hummed in the floorboards. It hummed in my bones. It hummed in the idea that the numbers I had hidden would sprout when the season turned. Sometimes you need to lose everything to find yourself again. The hospital paid less, but the light told the truth. Its floors were patterned with a blue tile that looked like the ocean pretending to be geometric. On my first week, I pushed a mop through the pediatric wing, while parents dozed upright, guarding sleep the way the poor guard coins. I understood the math of worry. It always rounds up. A nurse with kindness that jingled like keys walked the halls beside me. She showed me which vending machines $8 and which stairwell window could fit a sunrise inside it. The word I kept under my tongue was growth. It did not arrive like a trumpet. It arrived like making the bed before the apology, like returning a call you've been avoiding, like showing up to a life that stopped waiting for you and letting it forgive you anyway. Mid-shift, a boy with a shaved head asked if I could fold a boat from paper. We built a fleet between medication alarms. He named each one after something he planned to keep. He handed me a small boat and said, "This one is return." I carried it home and set it on the windowsill beside my daughter's photograph. I told the room the truth out loud for the first time in years. I am going to keep my promise to myself. On Sundays, the city loosened. I walked farther than the errands required, letting the avenues teach me their shortcuts the way a friend teaches trust. Near the river, a green bench had memorized too many secrets. An older man sat there most mornings in a coat polished to the shine of longevity, hat tipped with the kind of carelessness that only dignity can afford. He nodded. I nodded back. He asked, "You believe in second seasons?" I told him I used to believe in perfect first drafts. Now I believed in edits made with clean hands. He laughed, the laugh of someone who survived a storm by learning the names of all its winds. We spoke without hurry. He had been a school principal, the kind who wrote students' letters a decade late because truth sometimes travels by foot. He told me to keep my shoulders wide when the past tried to fold me small. He slipped me a thin book of poems and said, "Bring me one line next week. I'll trade you a story worth keeping." Hope returned to me like a shy animal, not with drums, but with the soft sound of a page turning. Faith was not thunder. It was breath. We did not speak about Meridian. We did not count money. We counted mornings. He said, "Fixing a life is not the same as polishing one." I walked away taller than when I arrived, and somewhere the bench learned a new secret. I was not done. I bought a used laptop from a pawn shop that flickered when I breathed near it. At the kitchen table, between the chipped mug and the jar of coins, I taught my hands their old language again, not for Meridian, for the part of me I had buried beneath shame. Public filings are stories that pretend they aren't. Footnotes are confessions that learned how to whisper. I read them like a detective reads wrists. Patterns rose. I recognized how certain gaps stack themselves like stairs to a locked room. Resilience, I learned, does not roar. It sets out chairs for a meeting nobody else wants to attend and waits until everyone sits down. At the hospital, I moved like a metronome. A father thanked me for emptying a bin without noise because his daughter had finally fallen asleep. A surgeon passed me and said, "Timing," as if he could smell the rhythm I had installed in my day. In the half hour before dawn, forgiveness began like a rumor I didn't trust. It suggested I could let the past take a seat without giving it my chair. Some nights, I believed it. I practiced by sending anonymous donations to a scholarship fund at the old community college. I wrote the memo line as if I were annotating a ledger, for whoever needs a line to hold. On my wall, a calendar grew check marks the way trees grow rings, slow, measurable, honest. The envelope in my mailbox had no return address and the color of a wall painted too often. Inside, A photograph of the executive floor at Meridian, grainy and slightly tilted, like a memory taken in a hurry. On the back, in a hand I almost recognized, "Not all doors are locked." The air leaned closer. The floorboard by the window breathed its thin, familiar breath. I tasted the city's metal in my mouth and waited for fear. It did not arrive. What came instead was the sensation of an opening, the click of a latch you had convinced yourself was part of the door. I thought of the boy who named a paper boat after my promise, of the nurse with the noisy kindness, of the man on the bench who traded stories for lines of poems. Forgiveness, I understood, isn't the opposite of accountability. It is the light that lets you read the accounting correctly. I took out a sheet of paper and wrote a letter I would not yet send, to the ones who taught me what not to be. Thank you. I am returning what you lent me, your contempt, your noise, your certainty. I am keeping your discipline, your patience, your hunger for clean lines. I will see you soon. I slid the letter under the photograph and opened the window a fraction. Night pressed its cool forehead against mine. Somewhere in the city, a hinge rehearsed the sound of opening. The paper boat rocked once on the sill and steadied itself. I steadied with it. If growth had a face, it would look exactly like this. A man in a quiet room, counting breaths, preparing to knock. There is a sound only old wood makes when it gives you what it has kept. The drawer in my small desk stuck for a breath, then slid open like a secret exhaling. Beneath tax receipts and a faded instruction manual for a toaster I no longer owned, I found the envelope I had written to myself on a night when survival felt like a job with no paycheck. The handwriting was steadier than I remembered. I broke the seal and pulled out the letter I had promised to save for the day the world tilted back toward balance. I had written about the boy's paper boat, about the nurse who believed in quiet victories, about the man on the bench trading stories like currency that doesn't depreciate. But what stopped me was a page I didn't recall adding, a photocopy of a certificate of shares, Meridian Holdings common stock, once mine, then sold, then reacquired piece by piece through a dividend reinvestment plan I set in motion in the days before my public fall. I had made small purchases every month, tucked into the corners of my poverty, amounts too minor to raise alarms, numbers that looked like rounding errors but were, in fact, a map back to my name. I had forgotten that hope can be practical. I had forgotten that purpose can be planned. The account summary listed an accumulation that wasn't wealth by their standards, but was power by mine. It was enough to speak inside a room that had tried to lock me out, enough to demand answers and to be handed the microphone rather than escorted towards silence. Purpose returned, wearing its working clothes. I laid the papers on the table and felt my pulse slow into a rhythm I trusted. I whispered to the photograph on the wall, the one with the red balloon. I kept something of us alive, not just the pain, not just the memory, a key. Gratitude rose not as a shout, but as a hand on my shoulder steadying. It was not gratitude for the suffering, I will never lie about that, but for the spine the suffering built, for the arithmetic of patience that had moved money like a trickle until it became a stream. I made tea in the chipped mug. Steam ribboned the window. When I sat again, I wasn't a man waiting for a miracle. I was a man ready to do math. Meridian glittered as if light could clean what ethics wouldn't. Their new marketing campaign filled the billboards. We build futures. They had acquired a smaller competitor, and the papers praised the leadership's bold vision. Interviews with Mr. Langford made him look like a statesman, a man whose smile was taught in schools of ambition. Bonuses were approved. A gala was announced. The tower's lobby sprouted fresh orchids, their petals disciplined into perfection. You could almost hear applause in the marble. I walked through that lobby with a visitor's sticker and the posture of someone who knows where he is going. No one looks at a janitor when he visits. They assume he is lost. I let them. The security guard who used to pretend I didn't exist nodded at me the way men nod when they think they have forgiven you for needing a job. An elevator opened. The mirrored walls reflected a dozen versions of me, each one more certain than the last. We rose. The executive floor smelled like citrus and policy. Assistants moved with the speed of people whose mistakes have witnesses. On a table outside the boardroom lay glossy pamphlets for the gala, a donor list, and a seating chart that adores hierarchy. I read names and found patterns I already knew. The consulting firm that always arrives when rules are about to be bent, the law office that writes contracts with clauses that behave like trapdoors. The antagonists were prospering. They always do before truth arrives. I did not request a meeting. I did not announce myself. I stood in the hallway and listened to the cadence of strategy, the choreography of power as it rehearsed its own applause. Then I left. In the elevator down, I smiled for the first time in a room that had taught me to keep my mouth closed. I wasn't ready to speak yet. I was ready to prepare the room to hear me. Preparation has a temperature. It is neither cold nor hot. It is the exact warmth of a hand closing around a doorknob it has feared for too long. I spent that evening at my kitchen table, surrounding myself with documents that had learned my breath. Bank statements, vendor ledgers, expense reports extracted from trash cans that never imagined the patience of a man who cleans for a living and notices what others throw away. I organized, cross-referenced, annotated. I created a narrative not of revenge, but of clarity. Evidence should tell the truth without raising its voice. An email sat on my screen addressed to the one person at Meridian I believed still owned a conscience. The head of internal audit, a woman who once held an elevator door for me and had the decency to meet my eyes. I attached a subset of what I had, not enough to trigger an immediate war, enough to convince a listener that the music was already playing and to invite her to hear the whole song. I did not sign my name. I signed a promise. There is more. At midnight, I walked to the river. The sky wore a halo where the city burned its insomnia. I thought of vengeance and found it small, the way a room shrinks when too many mirrors pretend to be windows. I thought of justice and found it like water, not loud, not theatrical, but impossible to stop once it begins to move downhill. I placed a paper boat on the black surface and watched the current accept it. Tomorrow, I would return to where it all began. The guard at the revolving doors didn't recognize me until I spoke. Memory slid across his face like a cloud deciding whether to rain. I said I had an appointment. The truth is, an appointment when you've been patient enough. He called upstairs and listened to the silence that follows a name arriving where it was not expected. The internal auditor came down herself. She wore a navy suit and the kind of attention that keeps careers honest. She shook my hand and said, "Walk with me." We moved through corridors where ambition polishes its reflection. She did not speak until her office door closed, and even then she glanced at the ceiling as if the building had ears. I placed the folder on her desk and waited. She opened it and did what good people do when the world briefly returns to its proper axis. She asked precise questions. I answered them tightly, refusing the drama that would make me feel large and the truth feel small. Redemption had arrived not as applause, but as alignment. Truth does not need music to be heard. She said, "You understand what happens if this is as complete as it appears." I said I understood arithmetic, and arithmetic doesn't care about charisma. She looked at me for a long beat and then said, "There's a board meeting tomorrow. They're announcing a new strategic framework." She didn't need to say the word that both of us were thinking, window dressing. She asked if I would be willing to speak when the time came. I told her yes, but only after the numbers had been verified by hands other than mine. I was not there to perform a reckoning. I was there to measure one. When I left her office, the glass of the building reflected a man whose shoulders had stopped apologizing. In the lobby, a young employee held the door for a delivery man with arms full of boxed futures. I stepped into the morning and felt the city tilt. Not much, just enough to let the day slide toward balance. Boardrooms are built to make certain people forget how to be small. The oval table gleamed like a certainty. Chairs confessed their price in the shine of their leather. The windows displayed the skyline as if it were a trophy the room had hunted and mounted. I stood near the back as the directors assembled, my folder resting on a chair as if it were an invited guest. Mr. Langford entered late, mug of black coffee in his hand, confidence fitted like a custom suit. He scanned the room as men scan rooms they believe belong to them. Introductions began. Strategic framework slides appeared, glossy with euphemism. A consultancy partner spoke in abstract nouns that clicked against each other like ice. The internal auditor cleared her throat. "Before we proceed," she said, "there is a matter of material significance we must review." Her voice was calm, not performative. The screen went dark. The room followed, not in light, but in temperature. She summarized the evidence I had given her and the confirmations her team had found overnight. She did not name me. She did not need to. The room knows the source of gravity when it feels itself lean. Mr. Langford's jaw tightened in increments, a man trying to swallow a stone. "These are serious allegations," he said, as if tone could reassign facts. "Unverified claims can damage reputations." I stepped forward not to perform, but because the truth is bolder when it walks like a person. My voice belonged to someone I'd been building in silence. I did not recount humiliation or ask for sympathy. I laid out the sequence, the double-billed contracts, the shell vendors, the compensation swaps booked as consulting fees. I named dates and amounts, not to dazzle but to anchor. I reminded them of audit trails that don't forget when the power goes out. Integrity entered the room wearing plain clothes and carrying a calculator. There was a silence that did not cower. Then a director with winter hair said, "Mr. Green, is it?" He looked at me the way men look at a ledger they have just realized belongs to them too. I nodded. Across the table, another director whispered to a third. But the whisper arrived late, and I understood then that shame moves more slowly than truth when truth has numbers. Mr. Langford attempted to redirect. He spoke of loyalty, of misunderstandings, of the complexity of growth. The words felt like mirrors pretending to be windows again. I did not ask for vengeance. I asked for a vote to initiate an independent review, to suspend implicated officers during the investigation, to notify regulators, and to protect whistleblowers. Not only me, but the ones who would now find courage in the math. The auditor added that failing to do so would itself be a disclosure event. The law prefers messy truth to polished lies. The man with winter hair cleared his throat. "We vote," he said. Hands rose, some slowly, some with the speed of people who have just remembered their names. Mr. Langford's hand did not move. His face tried to learn humility in a single minute and failed. I watched the room see itself in a mirror it did not like and decide collectively to change the frame. Truth, when written, looks small, just ink and alignment. Yet inside those lines lived years of breath I hadn't wasted, nights I hadn't slept, and dignity I had preserved in silence. The independent review began within days. Documents migrated from desks into sealed boxes, computers were imaged, and the hum of control replaced the rhythm of arrogance. For the first time in a decade, the building didn't smell of superiority. It smelled of disinfectant and the faint metallic scent of fear. A week later, a newspaper headline did what years of rumors couldn't. It told the story. Meridian Holdings under investigation for accounting irregularities. No exclamation marks. Truth doesn't need them. My name appeared only once, buried in the middle paragraphs, under source familiar with the audit. That was enough. I didn't need a spotlight. I needed the balance restored. I walked to the park that evening and sat on the same bench where the old man had once traded stories for lines of poetry. I whispered, "It's done." The river reflected the skyline, trembling under wind. From my coat pocket, I unfolded a printout of an internal memo I hadn't written, but knew I had inspired. Effective immediately, CEO Alexander Langford resigns, pending the completion of the investigation. Integrity had finally written its name on company letterhead. The city didn't notice, but the people who needed it did. Janitors, assistants, clerks who had learned to speak softly because loudness was a privilege. For them, redemption wasn't a word, it was a shift in gravity. Later that night, I stood at my window with the photograph of my daughter, now older, her social media profiles, showing a life she built without me. I typed a message I never sent. Your father didn't vanish. He was rebuilding his honesty piece by piece so you could inherit a name that didn't flinch. Truth, after all, is a kind of inheritance, quiet, invisible, incorruptible. Weeks passed before the board reconvened to finalize their internal findings. I was invited to attend as a witness. The same oval table awaited, but this time its polish reflected uncertainty. No orchids adorned the corners. Humility had a new decorator. When I entered, conversation stopped, then resumed with the careful diction of people rehearsing sincerity. The interim chairwoman nodded to me, an acknowledgement carved from respect, not pity. The report was read aloud, item by item. Every hidden expense, every inflated invoice, every manipulated quarter laid bare. The auditor's voice did not tremble. Numbers do not apologize. I watched faces crumble under the arithmetic of conscience. Truth was no longer abstract. It had line items, timestamps, and signatures. Langford wasn't there. Rumor said he'd fled to another country. Maybe. But guilt doesn't recognize borders. It travels light. One of the senior partners began to weep quietly, a soundless surrender that no camera would catch. The room's air thickened with something close to grace, not forgiveness yet, but the moment before it becomes possible. When the meeting ended, the chairwoman approached me. "Mr. Green," she said, "what would you like us to do with you? Return you to finance? Offer restitution?" I shook my head. "Justice doesn't need a paycheck," I said. "Just make sure no one else has to clean the floor to see what's on it." She smiled sadly. "That might be the most expensive instruction we've ever received." Not long after, I received an email from a private address. It was from Langford. The subject line read, "Coffee." My pulse slowed instead of quickened. I agreed. The cafe was small, its windows fogged from the winter rain. He sat by the corner table, wearing the kind of coat that tries to imitate dignity but doesn't quite remember its size. When he saw me, he stood, then realized standing wouldn't undo the past. He said he hadn't known the extent of the fraud, a partial truth pretending to be whole. He blamed subordinates, consultants, stress. He said my exposure had ruined him. He said I'd won. I stirred my tea slowly and said, "Winning implies a game. I was auditing one." Silence filled the table. He leaned forward. "I lost everything." I looked at his trembling hands. "Not everything," I replied. "You still have the chance to learn what honesty feels like. Most people die before they do." He asked if I could forgive him. The word compassion circled my mind like a cautious bird. Forgiveness doesn't erase, it reclassifies. "Forgiveness," I said, "isn't for you, it's for me. So your shadow doesn't keep renting space in my heart." He nodded, eyes wet but unsure whether from shame or habit. When I stood to leave, he whispered, "You could have destroyed me." I answered, "You did that yourself. I just wrote the footnotes." Outside, rain cleaned the sidewalks without asking for credit. In the weeks that followed, I found myself walking differently, slower, not from age but from weightlifting. The hospital kept me on part-time. They said my calmness helped people heal. One evening, as I mopped a hallway near the recovery ward, a young intern asked, "Is it true? Were you the one who exposed Meridian?" I smiled and said, "I'm just good with ledgers." He laughed, uncertain if it was a joke. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. That night I went home and lit a candle instead of turning on the light. The flame carved a small cathedral out of the dark. Humility lived there, breathing gently. I took the red balloon photograph from the wall and wrote my daughter's number on the back just once more. I dialed, half hoping the voicemail would answer. When her voice came through, older, steady, curious, I said only, "It's Dad. I just wanted you to know everything is balanced now." She didn't speak at first. Then, "I read about you." Her voice trembled. "I'm proud." The call ended softly, but the silence it left behind felt like sunlight. Later, I sat by the window watching dawn spread its accounting across the sky. Every beam a line item, every shadow a subtraction. Redemption wasn't loud. It was measurable, like breath. Months passed. Meridian emerged from investigations smaller but cleaner. Policies changed. Names vanished from letterhead. The company sent me an official notice, a letter of public acknowledgement for my courage and contribution to ethical reform. I placed it beside my daughter's photo, not as proof, but as punctuation. I didn't attend the gala they organized to rebrand Redemption. Instead, I spent that evening at the hospital, helping a nurse who'd hurt her wrist. The world doesn't stop needing clean floors, even when truth wins headlines. When I finished, I walked to the rooftop. The city stretched below, lights blinking like Morse code between the forgiven and the forgetting. I exhaled into the cold air and said quietly, "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoring balance." The wind carried the words somewhere they belonged. I imagined them landing on every desk, every hand that had once signed a lie. Maybe they would sprout, maybe they wouldn't. My work was done. The city would decide the rest. Morning unfolded with the slow grace of forgiveness. The city, still damp from night rain, seemed quieter, as if even the traffic had learned reverence. I walked the same path I had taken 1,000 times, past the bakery that opened before dawn, past the newsstand whose owner no longer flinched at headlines. My name had finally disappeared from the papers. The world had found new scandals to feed on, but inside me, something vast had stilled. I stopped before the tower of Meridian Holdings. It stood smaller somehow, though nothing in its structure had changed. Maybe it was the light, or maybe arrogance, once broken, casts shorter shadows. New executives moved behind the glass, and for the first time, they greeted the janitors. The marble floors still gleamed, but now they reflected faces instead of footsteps. The internal auditor had taken Langford's place. She'd written to thank me, but I hadn't replied. Some victories don't need correspondence. I just stood there remembering the man I'd been, the one who entered this building in a suit and left with a mop. I whispered a prayer, not of triumph, but of release. Let this be the last time pain has to teach me math. I turned away, leaving the glass monument behind. The reflection followed for a few steps, then stayed where it belonged, in the past. That afternoon, as I was mending a loose pipe in the hospital's maintenance wing, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something inside me already knew. A soft voice said, "Dad." I froze. The wrench in my hand clattered to the floor. "Lydia." The name felt both ancient and immediate. She breathed out a small laugh that cracked mid-air. "I didn't know if you'd still use this number." "I never changed it," I said. "I was waiting for the reason not to." We talked for an hour that could have lasted a lifetime. She told me about college, about her work with a non-profit that helped small businesses stay transparent, about how she'd chosen accounting, not to escape my shadow, but to finish what I started. "I used to hate numbers," she said. "Then I realized they can protect people too, if you read them right." She asked if we could meet. My throat closed around the word yes, but it came out anyway. We agreed on Sunday at the park where the river keeps everyone honest. When the call ended, I leaned against the cool wall and let my pulse find its rhythm again. Peace had a heartbeat that simple. The nurse passed by and asked if I was okay. I smiled, eyes damp. "Yes," I said, "just remembering something beautiful I forgot wasn't gone." Sunday arrived, dressed in sunlight that didn't need forgiveness. The park looked as it had years ago, yet every leaf seemed new. Children fed pigeons with the joy of people who don't yet understand debt. I sat on the familiar bench, the wood smoother now, the years sanded down by weather and patience. Then she appeared, Lydia. Not the child with the red balloon, but a woman with the same clarity in her eyes. Her hair was darker, her posture sure, her walk steady. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then smiled, and time lost its arrogance. When she reached me, she didn't speak. She just hugged me, fiercely, as if retrieving a piece of herself from the years. I held her, inhaling the scent of almond shampoo and belonging. "I'm sorry," she whispered against my shoulder, "for believing what they said." "I'm sorry," I replied, voice breaking, "for giving them silence to fill." We sat. The river moved beside us, steady and impartial, the same river that once carried a paper boat named Return. She reached into her purse and pulled something out, a small, faded piece of folded paper. "You kept it?" I asked. She nodded. "You sent it once in a birthday card. I was too angry to open it. I found it last year." Inside, in my uneven handwriting, were only 5 words. "Keep your light, even alone." She traced the letters. "I think you did," she said. Forgiveness didn't arrive like a ceremony. It arrived like sunlight, sneaking through leaves, quiet and unstoppable. We talked until dusk stole the park's edges. She told me about the house she'd bought with her husband, about their first child on the way. I told her about the hospital, the poems traded for stories, the quiet audits of the human spirit I'd learned to conduct. Before we parted, she asked, "Do you ever miss what you lost?" I looked at the water reflecting orange sky and said, "I didn't lose it. I just learned to count it differently." Months passed with the rhythm of simplicity. I stayed at the hospital, but the work changed shape. Now, when new employees joined, the ones who mopped floors or fixed pipes, I gathered them for 10 minutes before their first shift. I'd tell them what no supervisor ever told me. This job isn't about cleaning what's dirty. It's about seeing what others overlook. The world is built on overlooked things, numbers, people, kindness. One evening, an intern asked if I'd ever go back to the corporate world. I smiled. I still am in it. The difference is, I don't clock in at the wrong floor anymore. At home, I began writing again, not letters this time, but reflections, stories about balance and humility, about power without applause. The words came easily now, carrying a melody that felt older than regret. I submitted one of them anonymously to a small journal. A month later, it was published under the title The Invisible Accountant. It spoke about the moral currency of grace, how some debts are settled only through kindness. In the margins of my notebook, I wrote the sentence that had become my compass. Kindness isn't weakness, it's strength with grace. I taped it above the door. Each morning I touched it before leaving, as though blessing both departure and return. Years rolled on, gentle but unrelenting. Lydia's son was 5 when he asked me, "Grandpa, were you a superhero?" I laughed so hard I almost cried. "No, kiddo," I said, "just an auditor with a broom." He grinned. "That's the same thing." They visited often. The apartment grew crowded with life, drawings on the fridge, fingerprints on glass, toys on the couch. Where once silence lived, laughter rented every corner. I found myself humming while making coffee, something Helena used to do. I realized then that healing doesn't arrive all at once. It collects like interest in an account you forgot you opened. Meridian Holdings sent another letter one day, not corporate this time, but personal, handwritten by the new board. They'd established a scholarship in my name for students studying ethics in accounting. I stared at the words until they blurred, then whispered, "Balance achieved." That night, Lydia came by after work. She read the letter, smiled, and said, "You know, you started something bigger than money." I asked, "What do you mean?" She said, "People talk about integrity now like it's profitable again." I looked at her, at the life I almost lost, and felt the equation complete. The figures balanced, the credits matched the debits. And in that silence of symmetry, I understood that peace wasn't something I earned. It was something I stopped misplacing. Years later, when the city changed its skyline again, and my hands began to tremble from age rather than anger, I returned one last time to the tower. It had a new name now, new colors, new stories. I was just an old man with a cap and a gentle gait, walking slowly through a lobby that no longer feared its own reflection. The young receptionist smiled. "Good morning, sir. Are you here for a meeting?" I smiled back. "No, I already had it. Just came to clean up what's left." She looked confused, but I winked and walked toward the glass doors. Outside, the wind moved softly, carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. I sat on a bench across the street, the same distance from which I'd once watched the empire that ignored me. Now it was just another building under the sun. I pulled from my pocket the last paper boat, smaller than before, folded from the edge of an old audit report. I set it beside me. A child, walking with his mother, pointed. "What's that, Grandpa?" "It's a receipt," I said. "Proof that I gave back what wasn't mine to keep." He laughed, not understanding, and that was enough. As the sun slipped behind the skyline, the light turned the city gold, not the kind that blinds, but the kind that warms. I closed my eyes and thought of every face, every floor, every night I'd scrubbed not just dirt but despair. For years, I'd believed redemption was about the right to speak again. Now I knew it was about the courage to stay silent when your peace is louder than any defense. If you're listening tonight, remember, the world will always test your kindness, mistake it for fragility, mock it for weakness. But kindness, real kindness, is arithmetic the universe understands. Every time you choose integrity over applause, you write a profit no scandal can erase. And in the final balance sheet of the soul, when every ledger closes and every mask is removed, one truth remains. Kindness is the real wealth.